This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends. Hello and welcome to Evangelical, a show exploring the world inside and outside the evangelical subculture. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. Apologies for the gap between shows. Last week I came down with my third bout of strep throat this summer and it totally laid me out. In fact, my first bout of strep was immediately prior to recording this episode with Seth and Steve, so it somehow bookended this conversation. In the last episode, Steve and Seth talked to me about the different personality types found in the Enneagram, and in this episode, they get to work helping me determine my own type. It's a bit more self-indulgent and self-revelatory than I tend to be on the show generally, which I prefer to keep about my guests instead of myself, but I hope that this exercise is as fruitful for you as it was for me. If you were like me and were a bit uncertain about the Enneagram, or were at least a bit uncertain about what personality type you might be, this may help you understand a bit more about how it all works. I'm thankful that they decided to take the time to walk me through this process. One note, because I was recovering from strep, my throat was still recovering and a little raspy, and we'd already been talking for a couple of hours by the time we get to this point, so sorry about that. You can catch Steve and Seth on their own podcast, the E9 Podcast, wherever you find those sorts of things. iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, Overcast, Castro, all of the podcast apps you can imagine. You can find their podcast wherever you listen. As always, if you enjoy this show, please rate and review it on iTunes. Support it via Patreon at patreon.com/exvangelicalpod. You can also follow me on Twitter at brchastain. You can follow the show at exvangelicalpod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also like the show on Facebook and join the Facebook group by searching for Exvangelical on Facebook. We've got over 3,000 members, and it is a very lively place to have all sorts of discussions. So please check that out if you're looking to talk to more people about what is happening in Exvangelical land. All right, let's get into it. Awesome. Well, that is the Enneagram. We're done.
Yeah. Now everyone knows everything they need to know about the Enneagram.
Yeah, that's right.
We've now addressed the most superficial level of the whole thing.
Yeah. Honestly, one of our episodes that we've recorded for our own podcast, we do the same thing. We do it a little bit more in depth, but even still, it's a little superficial. I'm hoping that this introduction is enough to get people interested and to explore.
Right. No, and I haven't addressed it directly within the podcast or anything. And that's the thing about, coming to this, even as someone that's sort of approached it from different sides over the last year or two, as I've been exposed to it through Steven and you, Seth, and through other people that I know online, just trying to understand the jargon that you sort of run into, because people throw it around online now. And honestly, one of my resolutions for 2018 was understand this jargon, even at the base level, because.
Yeah. Should we tell your listeners that that's actually how this came about? Was one day you tweeted out, I guess I'm going to have to learn the Enneagram just so I can continue to have conversations on this thing. and we said, hey, man, we'd be happy to help.
Yes.
And that was actually before we even had decided to do our own podcast. But that's kind of where our lives were going anyway. And so it all just kind of came together in this really, again, if I can use the word, providential way.
Yeah.
This is that we love, and we want to share that love with you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, right. Yeah, and I appreciate it. And that's the thing. That's what I know. Even like, again, sort of bringing back how much I've sort of circled this topic personally is, I know Steve on Facebook somewhere was like, the best way to do this is through conversation. Books are okay. Books are fine. You can learn a lot through books, but one of the key things about this is that it really helps to have conversations with people that have done it before, and et cetera. So I'm thankful for both of you taking the time to dive into it.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. But are we ready to get into the real work of it, though, with you, Blake?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I guess. Oh, well, okay. Go ahead, Steve.
I mean, you've talked a little bit about your exposure with it, but even before we get into the stuff we've talked about so far, where are you at with this? How are you feeling about the Enneagram? What are you thinking of it?
I'm feeling more like, I'm feeling more comfortable with it, and I mean, like, I just know the way in which I've seen people that I know personally and that I've known and gotten to know through the work of the podcast, like, that they benefit from it and that they see like a tangible value in understanding and using this as a sort of lens on themselves and on others. I definitely don't think that I am at any point like confident to say, like, when some people, look around and like they enter a room and they try to type people, or like they try to type the people in their lives, and I'm not to that point. And I'm taking.
Yeah,
what's that?
So we have a friend who's going to a school for counseling, and it's a pretty progressive school for counseling. It is a Christian school, but it's real progressive. And he was telling us just today how so many of the people there, they're really interested in the Enneagram.
Mm-hmm.
But even the students there will come up and just be like, you know what, I bet you're fill in whatever the number is. And it's just like, it's putting people in a box, and it's abusive. And the Enneagram, it's not meant to be that way. It should be wielded very gently. Mm-hmm. Where I've seen the Enneagram really show its power is not when I've been able to tell people, hey, man, you're a 3, and I know it. I might know that. I mean, or at least have a pretty darn good idea. But when they realize that they're a 3 or whatever, and they feel seen in a way that they haven't felt seen in maybe ever, and I'm there not judging them for not, like, even in the midst of them feeling seen, and there's a real power there.
Self-discovery is an integral part of how it works.
Yeah.
And you can't rob that from somebody.
Yes.
That's one of the reasons why, even though there are Enneagram podcasts out there, and a lot of other podcasts are still talking about it, we still felt compelled to join in the conversation because we want to bring a different angle on it that we feel like is the more important angle and is being lost. As Seth says, the Enneagram, the purpose of the Enneagram is to allow yourself to be more fully loved, to receive love, and to be able to freely love others, right? And so it functions according to the methodology of love, which is I express and you resonate with that or you don't, right? But I'm discovering myself and working on my own stuff. You're discovering yourself and working on your own self.
Yep.
And then we're two solitudes that can, protect and kiss, like Rumi said, right?
So people talk about the Enneagram as like it's this way of getting to know your true self. And I for the longest time I had a hard time like describing, so what is the true self? And then I finally realized I think what we're talking about there is the true self is the self that is able to freely love and allow itself to be freely loved. And that's what the true self is. And so we're trying to get rid of all of the stuff that's in the way of that. And that's what the Enneagram describes to us, is all the stuff that's in the way of being loved and loving freely.
Which, for me, because I find my home in the Christian mystical tradition, despite the fact that I have issues with a lot of the rest of the Christian tradition, the idea that God is love
Yep.
is meaningful to me in this sense, because also part of what's revealing about the Enneagram is that as I lose my false self that I've over-identified with, I'm more free to become my true self. And what does it end up being, my true self? My true self is a rootedness in love.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The true self is the self that loves.
I am a participant in love, and that is the thing that defines me above and beyond anything else. So the idea of having my identity rooted in God, like it's the sort of thing that Paul, I mean, I'm quoting the Bible on the Ex-Evangelical podcast, right?
It's okay.
If anybody's going to do it, it's going to be me, probably. Paul says, "You have been crucified, and you have risen. You have found your new identity, your true self, hid with Christ in God." Right? That the true self is not something you possess. I possess my personality. It's a controlling thing. It's a way that I defend myself and filter my access to the world. But finding my true self means letting go, releasing that, exposing myself to the world, ultimately finding myself only in trusting the mystery, right?
Yeah.
I am only who I am when I give myself over to the mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, that's what the Enneagram is releasing. Of course, you don't say that to people on day one exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so edit all of that out. You need to edit all of that out because they're not going to get it. That was too much. I mean, not only did Steve quote scripture, but he quoted Paul.
Oh yeah, big no-no.
Goodness
no.
gracious.
Honestly,
he's the worst. Am I right?
He's not.
I have lots of problems with him, but I have built a significant part of my own personal ethic around the Philippian hymn. So,
Beautiful. Yeah. All right.
So I have conflicted feelings about the guy, but he did quote the Philippian hymn, and you know what?
As someone who thought he was going to be a Bible scholar one day, I think having conflicted feelings about the Bible is one of the best places to be.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Until it's become strange to you.
Yeah,
you're reading your own stuff into it.
And boy, shouldn't we all have conflicted feelings about wandering into a mystery?
Oh yeah,
you shouldn't feel safe about it.
It's terrifying.
Yeah, totally terrifying. So
exactly.
I think you're in a good place.
That's what I think I just put on Twitter today, and I took a brief decade off of engaging with the Bible, and now I'm getting back into it.
Well, at least it was a brief
earnest.
decade.
And that was a little tongue in cheek, but anyways, so
yeah, we should start talking about you, Blake.
About you.
Okay.
Now we're turning our guns on you.
One of the
tables have turned.
Yeah.
One of the things we want to do with our podcast is, yes, talk about the Enneagram, but specifically as a language for helping us listen to the stories of other people. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I thought it would be great to talk with you and listen to your story as it resonates with the Enneagram.
Sure. So what's the best way to do that? Do you want me to sort of talk about the sorts of things that resonated within the different things you talked through, or
that'd be a great way. Yeah,
that would be excellent.
Okay. So I was taking notes throughout all of what the two of you were talking about in regards to the different centers and everything. So I guess I'll be honest, like this is like the thing that has been hard for me is I both because I'm not as confident in my knowledge of the system, as well as maybe I'm just not as self-aware as I'd like to be. I have not been able to confidently say I'm either this or that. So I basically tried to going through and determining which parts of all these different personality types, these different numbers, sort of resonate with me. And so that's, I guess, what I'll do. So going back to the beginning with the head types, or the triads or the centers, the 5, what you had mentioned as far as being someone that can tend to be cerebral, or someone that can be retreat into their head. I definitely have that tendency. I mean, I have pretty much always been like a compulsive reader, just because I like escaping into someone else's narrative, I guess, and I like being able to understand my world. So that's like a huge compulsion for me. And I do think that, like, I think some people, like, the thing I wish I had was like hypergraphia and that I wrote all the time, but I tend to have, something more common, like I read more, so that manifests now, and I'm generally on my phone. If it's not a book, it's a comic book. If it's not a comic book, it's Twitter, and that order changes throughout the day. But I do feel very, I do like to accumulate knowledge. I do like to rush headlong into things and learn a lot about stuff. And at different times in my life, I have definitely always wanted to always be in that sense of preparing, but not necessarily doing anything with that. That definitely sort of resonated with me. As far as with sixes, I am an anxious person. Like, I do have anxiety. It a lot of times is the sort of thing that will paralyze me. I don't feel like I'm. In the past, I may have tried to avoid hard feelings. I feel like through different things throughout the last few years of my life, I'm not necessarily in that spot. Like, I can sort of approach my hard feelings and work through them. But nonetheless, I have in the past, for me, this is probably a very telling thing. And when I was in college, and when you guys knew me fairly well, sort of the person I felt was like my mascot was like Dostoevsky's underground man, who is just obsessed with possibility, and is paralyzed by it. And that's who I was in my early 20s. I'm not that sort of person anymore, but that is in my history. I'm gonna be flipping over to what was the other one that I'm missing? Sevens. Sevens don't necessarily, I don't know, they don't resonate with me as much, I'll be honest.
That sounded like you were actually just talking about the seven with the possibilities.
Well,
that's
not being paralyzed by possibility.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like seven.
Yeah, so with sevens, I mean, so I think that was part of the, actually my notes did run together. So
Okay.
Yeah, so, I mean, I do...
Well, it's not my place to tell you who you are, but you don't strike me as a seven either.
Yeah, I don't.
Yeah,
I'm not.
No,
I'm not catching seven off of you.
No, I definitely feel that way too. Well, with
you're not
eights,
near fun enough.
That's fair.
For a good time, don't call Blake.
I'll talk to you about systemic problems for too long. For eights, as far as I have tended to sometimes question authority. Like, that's always been an element of my an element of my personality. But
How often do you say
I am
fuck
not
you?
someone. What's that?
How often do you say fuck you?
Not
like to
nearly
someone's
often
face.
Yeah. See, there you go. So I mean, I do challenge it, but I am far more interested in understanding someone else's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And that sort of sense of presence that I have is not one that fills a room. I will say that, and over time, I feel like 9 is something that I've sort of gravitated towards.
Okay.
As understanding. I do think that a lot of times I do, my desire to lessen anxiety is to try to take it down a bit, to explore meditative practices, contemplative practices. That's definitely been something I've been trying to learn more about over the last few years, entering, being in my 30s now and all that encompasses. I do like, the very nature of this sort of show is letting people tell their stories and It doesn't really have a combative element to it. I mean, it's more just about people coming on here and sharing their story and their experience, and letting that be cathartic. And I do think a lot of times I am much more comfortable articulating my perspective, but I don't find value in it. I mean, I value other people's perspectives more than I value my own.
Yeah.
And
is that something you heard with the 9, or maybe you picked up somewhere? I mean, I don't know if we kind of danced around that, but we never addressed that directly with the 9, I don't think.
Let's see. I think you had something. You mentioned that 9s don't recognize their own authority.
Right.
Oh, okay. Sure.
Yeah, and only the people that know me well know that, like, I can be an angry person, like, and that also resonates, you know, like, that it's not. Sometimes it's from something that I feel slighted, or it could be that I'm angry about a global situation that pisses me the fuck off, you know, like, and it feels wrong, like, to my very depths, you know. So for me, like, that definitely resonates, and is one that I feel sort of more drawn to than in the past. One, again, is also one that doesn't necessarily feel as that I identify as much with. Like, I do identify with that sense of having a constant critic, but I think I probably have had ones in my life, and, like, they have probably tired me out, I guess. Yeah. So instead of me, like, you know, meeting their level of intensity, it's more like, how do I survive this level of intensity?
So what I oftentimes ask ones is, like, yeah, everyone has an inner critic. Do you have the sense that yours is way louder and way more persistent than everyone else's, or does yours kind of feel about like everyone else's?
Right. Yeah.
But you can tell.
Yeah. And I don't think mine is there.
Okay.
And, like, I understand that, you know, that I'm definitely much more of, like, okay, everybody has a perspective. I don't necessarily. I think from what I've heard about ones, they have a sense of, like, universality that I don't have.
Yeah.
Like, that there's a particular way. Yeah. And I am just way more loosey-goosey than that.
Sure. Sure.
As far as with 2s and being hospitable, I understand that. I also definitely sort of identify with that sense of, like, acknowledging the other person before you acknowledge your own needs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that resonates with me a lot. That one in particular was.
So one of the things, I mean, we're going to have to sort through this once you're done, but it's worth pointing out at this point, a lot of the things, okay, so a lot of personality typologies deal with behavior, right? How we behave different ways. The Enneagram is special because it tries to get beyond behavior to inner workings and inner motivation. Yeah, so, for example, 1s and 5s often share similar behavior patterns because we will, like, expound on things, except 5s are, like, reasoning it out because they've thought it all through. 1s are more speaking from the gut. 8s and 1s have a certain kind of intensity, but it's a different thing going on under the surface. 8s and 3s have this leadership quality, a certain kind of social energy, but what's happening under the surface is different. 9s and 5s both have a tendency to avoid things in social situations. And they're similar, but the distinctions matter. And 2s and 9s. So the thing you mentioned about 2, I can see that in you. Also, I can see those behaviors in a 9 as well, motivated by 9 motivations rather than by 2 motivations.
Yeah, so both 9s and 2s lose a sense of their own desires, their own needs, their own agendas, but it's for different reasons. And so I think you've identified that, and I think you've kind of mentioned that with both. And the 9, maybe you didn't address it so directly. Maybe we didn't say it so directly. But that is something very common. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh, no. That's all very good. And I think that is a very important distinction to make. Some of the other, I think the other ones that are left are what, 3s and 4s?
Yep.
So 3s I don't really identify with. I mean, I can conversationally, like, I do try to know a little bit about everything so that I can talk to everybody, but it's really limited to that. Like, I could give two shits about fashion. Like, I just don't, like, appearance is not a major motivator for me.
It's interesting.
Like, I don't know. Like, and to me, it's one of those just acknowledging finite resources of how many spoons I have, you know, and it's like, I don't want to spend time dealing with clothes choices.
Yeah.
So that's a segue into, like, I wore just black shirts for a long time, you know? So like for a couple of years, I mean, I just had like 5 black V-neck t-shirts that I wore.
They were black shirts, so you could definitely be a 4. So.
Yeah. So, but generally, yeah. So this is sort of the weird thing for me, because I feel like a part of me in the past sort of felt like this sort of 4 type of person, where I understood myself to be this misunderstood sort of writer type guy that, you know, again, like this underground man sort of, not misanthropic, but like wanting connection, but feeling like it wasn't available on a wider scale. And I don't know if it's because, like, even though my show is about, this show is primarily about my guests, like, there is a bit of vulnerability in staking a claim and saying, okay, this show and things that are related to it are about repudiating this thing I came from and affirming something different. And that's like a clear stance. And so in my mind, a lot of that, like, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I used to feel this way, and now I feel like I don't feel this way as much anymore.
Yeah, Steve and I have theorized that maybe everyone goes through a 4 phase. Like, they're in high school and college, like, everyone just kind of feels that way.
Teenagers just kind of look like 4s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, like, there's times when I look back and I go, gosh, I did not look much like a 5 there at all. I really look way more like a 4. So I've had that kind of same experience, but I'm definitely not a 4.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's sort of those were all sort of my takeaways from, as you were talking, as you were walking through the different types on the Enneagram. Like, what are the things that resonate with me and what doesn't? Definitely not fun enough to be a 7 for sure. I might be a 7 after several drinks. But anyways, yeah. So, and I mean, that's where, like, okay, I've known enough to sort of be dangerous, you know, with different things, but yeah, that's sort of my take. I guess other things that I didn't sort of mention that could be like enlightening. I do have a tendency to, you know, avoid conflict or avoid even certain things that give me anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
That is a motivator, like, and that is like I think a dysfunction. Instead of working through the uncomfortable thing, you know, avoiding it, and then, you know, further things that can sometimes happen is, you know, I will, like, sort of eat my feelings, you know, like,
yeah,
those sorts of things can be patterns in my life that are sort of indicative of how I handle stress. But and that waxes and wanes because that's the nature of life. But those are sort of.
So here's what I'm curious about. I mean, you've resonated here and there. Obviously, some of these you feel more strongly about than others.
Mm-hmm.
Just your hunch. Leaning more toward inner dynamics than behaviors, but really identifying just your hunch. If you were to narrow down to 3 of these, which 3 would they be? I don't feel like you're locking yourself into it, but...
Right.
Once you identify them, I don't want to talk about any others. That was a joke. Sorry.
Don't feel like you're locking yourself in, but you totally are.
Yeah. It was a terrible joke.
I would say probably amongst all of them, probably like 4, 5, and 9. I'm guessing. Yeah. I don't know, like, because even though like anxiety can be a thing that
any of the types can feel anxiety, though.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
But to me, like, that's where those are the sorts of ones that sort of come back to me, I guess. But if I was going to sub one of those out, maybe the 5 would be subbed out for a 2, but I don't know whether that's consistent enough. But yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, I think you've touched on a couple important things here, and one, which is important to me, and I'll just mention briefly here, we don't need to go in depth with it, is that mental illness rides on top of these things, right? Mm-hmm. So, certain of the types may lend you a propensity toward certain mood disorders or whatever, right? You may start behaving a little more like those things or whatever. But also, mental illness is mental illness, and you may have a disorder that will color and maybe confuse and make it difficult to identify a type beneath it, right?
Right.
So that's a complication that we often don't talk about, and hopefully over time we may be able to explore a little bit on our podcast. We'll see how that goes. Mm-hmm. So anxiety is one of those things that can trip us up because 5, 6s, and 7s, we are the anxious types, right? Anxiety runs rampant through those, but anybody can experience anxiety, and so that's be a good marker.
Yeah,
which is frustrating. It would be nice if we're a good marker.
Yeah.
And one other thing to sort of expound upon that has been like another layer and consistency in my life is that like I, especially in formative years, I'm epileptic. I have, and one of the things that within my childhood, like the neurologist didn't know what the hell was happening, so they put me on tons of drugs with lots of side effects and all this other stuff. And one of the side effects of that treatment was that I sort of felt, estranged from my physical self, just because the seizures themselves are beyond my control. They couldn't be controlled by the medicine, and the medicine itself caused all these things. So like that's another element of things that have sort of affected my own sense of self, and then I'm sort of crystallizing even now, and I think that has sort of fed into and shaped different parts of my personality. It's not the totality, but it's not something that I can necessarily ignore either.
Because you've mentioned the 5, and I'm not trying to talk you into any of these, but one of the features of the 5 is we tend to treat ourselves like we are disembodied heads, like we've made bodies to be inconvenient, and kind of try and forget that we even have them if we can help it. So that, I mean, that could be even that early childhood experience could maybe kind of like even led you into kind of being a 5. 5s, it's strange. Like if we have a pain in our knee, in our wrist, we can just kind of almost just power on through it, forget that it's there. But if we have something going on in our head, like a toothache or something wrong with our sinuses or something like that, it'll shut us down, because anything going on with the head it just feels like it's too close to the mind, and it just kind of shuts us down and it messes with us. I don't know if it's something that, if any of that resounds with you. Like I said, I'm not trying to talk you into the 5. It's just since you had mentioned that 5 is one of the ones you're considering, and you mentioned that, and so I wanted to kind of into light. So
it is interesting that you the 3 types you pick, the 5, 4, and 9. One is in the head center, one is in the gut center, one is in the heart center. And so we're looking at very different constructions, inner constructions, that lead to somewhat similar behavior patterns in certain ways.
Well, they all withdraw.
They're all withdrawing.
Like, especially when it comes to conflict, they're all withdraw types.
But different things. So one of the interesting things here, this is a subtle distinction, but so let's imagine a public forum, right? There are people there's something happening. Let's say that there's a discussion, it's a heated discussion, or there's an event or whatever. You will frequently find 5s and 9s hanging out on the circumference of the space, right? They're not going to be in the midst of it. They're going to be standing back, watching it, maybe trying not even to be noticed. But we're avoiding 2 different things there. 5s are going to be avoiding drama. 9s are going to be avoiding conflict. That's a subtle distinction, but it's a really important one because it gets at the heart of the difference between the 5 and 9 dysfunction, right? That's one way of differentiating the 5 and 9.
Fives avoid it because they're afraid their energy is going to be sapped. One thing we didn't talk about with 5s is 9s actually have the lowest amount of energy of any, but 5s are the most aware of their energy. So
we
5s
feel like we have no energy.
Yeah, 5s wake up every day feeling like they only have half of a gas tank to make it through, and we are very aware of all the things that will sap energy. And so, like, public situations like Steve described are one of the things that can very easily sap a whole bunch of energy. And so we go into like a survival mode oftentimes, like, how can I not give up too much energy? And a lot of times it involves hanging around on the periphery, where 9s aren't as likely to do that, at least I don't feel. So is that useful at all?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think because generally I'm not necessarily afraid of getting into something. It's more, I do think that, I guess, it is that, like, okay, I have my own sort of emotions that I have to deal with. Like, do I have the energy to understand someone else's right now? So one of my prior jobs, I was a claims adjuster. I would have to negotiate with people over the value of their cars, over the phone. And, like, I was able to do that. So it wasn't necessarily that the job was unbearable. I could manage the conflict. But if there was an element of drama on top of that, whether it was emotional or something else, then that was the more taxing thing.
Here's another angle on this kind of distinction we're exploring here. This is something I often use as a sort of self-effacing example of 5 behavior, and I think it's a good way to contrast with 9s and how we manage our energy. Let's say because this has totally happened to me multiple times. Let's say I'm grocery shopping, and I'm in the midst of people, but I am in solitude in the midst of all these people, right? I'm managing my energy hardcore. And let's say that I see someone 2 aisles over who I know. Let's say I love that person. They're wonderful. I may still avoid them at all costs.
Yeah,
It's about energy. It's not about the person. It's about I know it's going to cost me. I know I don't have it, and I have to do this and this and this afterward. I have to manage my energy. A 9 won't most likely avoid that person. I'm painting with broad brushstrokes here. A 9 will totally engage that person even though it costs them. A 9 is likely to run their tank dry rather than...
And then crash.
Yeah, and then crash.
9s
rather
are the
than
best
avoid
nappers on all of the Enneagram. They're phenomenal.
I suck at napping.
Fives,
All right.
fives are more likely to avoid someone for the sake of their energy. Nines are more likely to embrace someone even at the expense of their energy.
Expensive energy. Even though nines actually have lower energy.
Yeah, nines
Fives
have
are
less.
just the ones who are super aware
Yeah.
of it.
One of the words that we use for fives is miserliness. We are miserly with our presence, miserly with our energy.
Yeah, we're stingy.
Stingy. When people live with fives, I can vouch for this. Frequently, they'll say, like, "You're not even here. You're not present." Like, obviously, physically, I'm here, but when people are in our intimate space, they often have the sense that we're not present even when we're there.
Right.
But that's not the case with nines. Nines are warm. People love nines.
Nines typically don't leave a strong first impression.
Yes. They're kind of ghostly. They're kind of fuzzy.
Like, eights have a super heavy energy, like you know when they're there. Nines, they kind of, like, you may or may not know that they're there. They don't have a strong energy. Steve, when he was first starting to talk about the Enneagram, was maybe a little bit ungracious towards nines. But he'd say, nines are boring. We've softened that up.
At first glance, they boring.
Yeah, it's not that they're boring. It's that they don't leave a strong first impression. But once you get to know them, they're warm.
They usually have an amazing sense of humor.
Yeah, great sense of humor.
Nines have great humor.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we're throwing a whole bunch of stuff at you, Blake. Is any of this? Do you feel like the clouds are parting, things are becoming more clear, or are we just making it worse? So the water's muddy?
No, I think it's helpful. I mean, I do feel like, so I can be, I can be very in my head about different things, and I'll run after like a particular interest for a really long time, just for the sake of knowing those things. And I feel like that's sort of compatible with what you're presenting about fives. I do know that there's part of me that can be, very, very warm and very emotional. I'm very, very warm with my daughter. I'm warm, generally with the people in my life. I like to think. I don't know if I always come across that way. I also know that, like, I have, like, my high school friends would remark that there would be times when I would just disappear, like, literally. Like, I could, if I needed space I would just get up from the lunch table when no one was looking, and go and take my space. And then
sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, yeah. So like, I know that, like, I've read. So I don't know whether that's like a combination of like a 5 with a 4 wing or whatever else, like, or whatever that might be. But like, I understand. I do feel like I have a good sense of the sorts of resources I have available, and like, I know when things are sort of blocking me, I guess, emotionally or whatever, even if I don't have the courage to approach them, like, at a given time.
Okay.
So the reason why I think, like, nines are sort of interesting is because, they are very they are sort of focused on conflict and making peace. But at the same time, I'm not sure whether that's like the most clear motivation that I have personally. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that, a lot of the things that I've learned about nines is that they are interested in their own sense of peace, and that is something that is a motivation. But I don't know whether it's actually consistent with the way I behave and the things that motivate me more day to day, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So,
Nines are pursuing peace specifically because they don't have a sense of inner peace. There's a lot of inner turmoil. Mm-hmm. Fives are pursuing solitude because they are aware that everything is sapping their energy. and those
Yeah.
those look very similar.
So, along with the
Right.
energy issue, I think that there's something behind that where fives, the reason that we're so concerned about our energy is because there is a constant fear, not just of having our energy sapped, but we are always afraid that we aren't enough. We never feel competent enough. We never feel ready enough. We never feel like there's just enough of us. And so we hold on to it too tightly because whatever there is of us, we don't want to give it out too easily. Like we just feel like there's not enough there.
Right.
So we're very, like I said, we're just very stingy emotionally with our own energy. Like fives, if we let ourselves go, we can have a real presence. But most of the time, we're just holding our energy back. And there's actual times when we'll actually turn our energy way down low and just like be putting nothing out there into the room. And it's because we just don't. We're just afraid there's not enough. I'm going to run out.
Right.
There's not enough of me there. I'm not competent enough. I'm not good enough.
Right. And that's definitely that sounds very familiar right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a sense of not being enough, not being strong enough, not being successful enough, not being present enough. You know, even that's a huge thing for me. Is like, am I enough?
Yeah, we're starting to hit on
and even
things.
And even like, I think even that sense of energy, like I do sort of get that. Like if there's too much, I wear these headphones, these big can headphones, you know, when I work sometimes because there's too many demands on even my own like my own oral AURAL environment that I need to be able to focus. And then even in my home, if my dog and the other members of my family are all demanding things at once, I want to be singular. Like that is the thing. Like I want to be focused, but it's not. And when I'm not able to do that, when I want to put something in a list of priorities and then be able to get it down. And then when I feel like I can't do that, that's when I begin to feel overwhelmed. So
yes. Well, I mean, I'm not going to say where I think this is pointing, but it's starting to be a little more clear to me what you're favoring here. I think another way to go a little deeper, discerning where you feel more at home, might be to. This could go very deep, but we'll stay on the surface a bit with this. Moving away from looking at the Enneagram as a circle or a horseshoe, and actually pay attention to the graph, the way the lines move. And especially because the 9 and the 5 are in different patterns here. The 9 is a part of the 9-6-3 triangle. So the reason why those lines are connected is because you may ordinarily, like this is your type. Like this is your primary energy. Type is a complicated word. But this is your primary energy. Now let's say you're at a major stress point, right? You're not at your best. Then you'll tend to slip into you'll behaviors that look like an unhealthy version of this other type. And that's why the arrow is connected that way.
So for 9,
and there's
in stress, you would move to a 6 and take on certain 6 behaviors.
Like the paralysis, like the fear, the inactivity. But
trying to connect yourself maybe to an external authority instead of having
internal authority. Exactly.
For the 5, you'd go to the 7.
Yeah, 5s go to 7 in stress. It's like I know my energy is running so low, so I'm going to indulge in all the things that help me fill up my energy, and also indulge in the things that help me shut down the obsessive mind. It's so active that I don't think I typically get addicted to things, but when I show addictive patterns in my behavior, it's an obsession with things that help me slow down and shut off my mind for a while, because it can become too much.
Right.
So then the arrows move in the other direction as well, right? So when you're moving into strength, when you're at the best version of yourself, when you're really actualizing yourself rather than being in that ambivalent, dysfunctional space, then you'll start to look like a healthy version of this other thing. You take on some of those behavior patterns. The motivations still remain your primary energy, but you begin to behave more like this other type, like you're learning their medicine for your problem, right? So for a 5, you move into 8 space, right? So it's about right action. When I am engaged, when I'm active, when I'm not self-conscious, when I'm not retreating, but rather when I'm engaged in the world, when I'm moving forward, when I'm confident in making decisions, when I'm selfless, not in the sense of not being selfish, but not being focused on myself, but I'm rather spending my energy in the world, that's the best version of me.
Yeah.
And
we get out of our head, we're able to act,
Yeah.
and we're able to draw energy from the world like an 8 can. Where we're always so afraid of spending our energy.
It turns
What'll happen
out
is we can do that patent thing and go, God, I love this, and like draw in all
when
that
you find
energy.
your
Right.
arena, you know?
Yeah, maybe not quite like an 8 can, but we don't have to worry so much about losing our energy.
Right.
We can actually benefit. The world can actually give us energy.
If 8s are the big bulldozer, 5s are the little bulldozer.
When we're able to bulldoze.
So a 9 in strength will move to the 3.
Get in touch with their own agenda. They finally see clearly their own goals, their own desires.
Actually working towards success.
Yeah.
Rather than just not rocking the boat, I can actually like do something. I can engage. And so you can see how those dynamics are similar in the sense that 9s and 5s have certain behavioral similarities.
The medicine to their illness looks similar too.
The medicine looks similar as well.
Yeah.
Is any of that helpful?
Yeah, I think so.
While you're kind of thinking about it, let me tell you, like, for example, for me, for a 5 going to the 7, when I'm stressed, like, I may not even realize I'm stressed yet until it's like, oh gosh, I'd really love to start playing video games. Like, when all of a sudden every night I want to just spend some time playing video games, I know that, I just want to go find something. I still want it in isolation, but I want to do something that's not reflective. It's just going to get me out of my head. I need that something that's just fun, and so it can work really nice like a red flag. When I see that pop up, I go, I probably have some stress that I need to deal with. Also, it's not a bad place to kind of go preemptively.
Yeah.
Like, I know I kind of need that. Why wait until I'm stressed? If I do it a little bit here and there, I can do it in a way that's actually healthy and can keep me from, I can like deal with my stress preemptively instead of like waiting until it's overwhelming.
That's one of the signs of maturity, is being able to use your stress point proactively in a disciplined way, right? So if I engage 7 energy periodically, like actually let myself have fun and be social, then I'm less likely to need to crash into that in a bad place.
Yeah.
So for a 9, that would be finding ways to use the 6 energy in constructive and disciplined ways, right? So maybe you can trust authority sometimes as a way of developing your own inner authority. Maybe slowing down and reckoning with the conflict and the risk and all those things is better than just always trying to ride the surface and avoid conflict, right? So there are a lot of different ways you can appropriate that intentionally rather than crashing into it in an unhealthy way.
Yeah.
We are just throwing so much stuff at your
No, I think it's really good. I think maybe you may have tipped the scales a little bit for me, especially with regards to the sort of teasing out there, they're constituent and related points between stress and health and everything. I think you have tipped the scales a bit towards probably like a 5, just in that the way you manage energy and the way you because I do always sort of feel like I am introverted, like if we are going to bring Myers-Briggs into it, like I was INFP,
Me too.
Territory, man.
Yeah.
So like I am introverted. I do have this need to like reset. And when I am stressed, I do tend to want to blow off steam in, like video games or I've got a list of books to read that's miles long, but, I won't tackle that. I won't tackle that. I'll read a comic book that takes 30 minutes, like a graphic novel, because that's easier to, it's easier than trying to crack open, James Cone, or something else,
I love Cone, but give me a break, man.
Because when the 5 goes to the 7, like, even when we isolate, we still have, like, all of that mind stuff going just so fast and so busy all the time. Like, our mind is always humming. But when we go to the 7, we're trying to escape even that. And so we don't even want to reflect on anything. We just want something to occupy it, so we don't have to even reflect on anything, or we can just be doing something to occupy it and not think.
Yeah, and to me, a lot of times that presents as like, I need to numb something.
Yeah.
It's like I need to stop this in its tracks, and a lot of times that's not successful. It's just below the surface. It's not
successful.
It's just pushing it below the surface, and then creates this vicious cycle of, okay, you delayed addressing this, and now it's worse. But
that's the unhealthy way of going to it, where if you learn to see it as a red flag, you can go, ooh, now there is something I need to address maybe I didn't realize, or even doing it preemptively and working it into your routine so that you don't have to go to it out of compulsion.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And to what you said about, feeling like an 8, or like being someone that can challenge situations and things like that. Like, there are certain instances where if I'm feeling, for whatever reason, very confident on a given day, like, I will literally have more, like, pep in my step than normal.
Yes.
I'll walk faster.
Yep.
I'll walk faster. I'll stand straighter. I'll actually engage people instead of having, people come and engage me.
Be more present in your body and the world.
Right, yeah. And that's where, like, a lot of times I do have this sense of being disconnected from my body because of my experiences.
Yes.
But those are the days in which, like, okay, like, I feel it all. Which is interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that the way you sort of tease that out does resonate quite a lot.
Well,
good.
As if your scale is tipping toward 5, then I feel like I can be free to connect a few things that you've said.
Okay.
That made me think that as well. The way you talked about fashion. Clothing is functional above all else. I want to not have to think about it. I want to feel comfortable in what I wear, being detached from the body. All of those patterns are very 5 things.
In fact,
5s tend to be very, very conventional, very uninteresting, very practical in their attire, and yet often have like one element that is unusual, right? Like Seth wears bow ties. I have this hat I wear all the time.
Although I think I'm actually kind of atypical for a 5.
You are.
I mean, if you remember me in college, Blake, a lot of people told me I was known as one of the best dressers on campus. Not that I still carry that with me.
That's not in dispute.
I mean, not that, but
I remember coming across a conversation you were having at McCon, and you said, accessories.
I love that. I might just make that just like my life quote. Like I'm gonna put that up on Twitter. Is what about the accessories? Yeah. But I'm gonna like people that way. But I think it's funny that you said that for years, there's a period of years where you only wore black T-shirts. We actually ran across another 5 who everything he owns is black, just so he doesn't ever have to think about it.
Oh yeah, For me, it was
black jeans, black pants. Everything is black, just because it's just easy that way.
That pattern for me, for a long time, it was black T-shirts. Now that I'm trying to, look the part in a professional environment, and I'm taking that more seriously, it's all a matter of greens and browns. So that everything I have will match no matter what I throw on that day. And I have a style. It's conventional. The shirts are like wrinkle free because I don't tend to take those things very seriously, but I still need to look the part, right? So I'm trying to find a way to be a high functioning 5 who totally doesn't take attire seriously, but needs to look like he kind of does so.
While we're on this, there's a person who she's actually done, and I don't know how to pronounce her name, but it looks like Catherine Favre. It might be pronounced Favre. I don't know. It's a similar spelling. But she's actually done like a whole book on how each type thinks of dress and the kinds of words they use. And 5s tend to think of like how they present themselves and the way they dress as camouflage. I want to kind of blend into the background of whatever my main environment is, whatever my main grouping is. We're interested in just kind of doing enough to blend into the background, not really stand out. We tend to think of clothing as camouflage.
Yeah, I get that for sure. And like, I mean, I do, and it's probably just part of, entering not exactly middle age, but into your mid 30s and whatever else.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to be frumpy anymore. Like at one point I was fine being frumpy,
Yeah.
Oh man, yes.
But like, I don't want to be frumpy anymore. Like I probably need to buy better jeans, but the other thing is that I am fine spending money on books, on technology, but like clothes to me, it's a sunk cost. Even
the way you talk about though, it almost sounds like you're annoyed. You become aware that your body can come off as frumpy, and you're just annoyed at your body that it would do that.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly.
Yep. Were there any other puzzle pieces that you wanted to highlight, Steve? Things that you had noticed?
Okay. So you were curious that you might be a 4, right? That was one of the 3 you mentioned, and so it's very possible that you are a 5 who developed a 4 wing early on, right? And so what that might mean is that you can access 4 energy sometimes. That you may have some 4-ish elements in how you engage in 5 patterns. Also, somewhat later in life, we often start to develop the 2nd wing. So if you develop the 4 wing early in life, you may notice that any time now, you may be developing some 6 elements, right? Which may mean not necessarily that you are obsessive about what could go wrong, but that you may have a heightened sense of it, that you're thinking about those things a little more. You may think about external authority. It's hard to say what that might be, but frequently we start to develop the 2nd wing somewhat later in life. I haven't heard you say a whole lot that made me think 6, but that doesn't mean that exploring some 6 energy as a potential wing might not be useful. But I would start with a 4 because you have expressed a lot of 4-ness, right? And you yourself said that you resonated with it, especially early on.
And 5, I was always told I was too emotional as a kid. I was too sensitive. All that sort of
could be a thing
stuff.
to trigger, honestly.
Yeah. When you're told you're too emotional, you're too sensitive, you know, you're motivated to shut that down and get out of touch with it, which is an issue for the fives.
For me, part of the trigger was my mother was fairly abusive in an emotional sense, right? So it was an act of self-protection to not be emotionally vulnerable.
Yeah.
Right? And so it's not that I was or am an unemotional person, but you can learn to shut those things off in reaction to a world that's not receptive to it.
Yeah. And then the trade-off is now you're an adult and you're like, where the hell are my emotions?
Yeah.
I know I'm feeling them now. Why do they come a week later?
Suddenly, shut off to my emotions isn't working for me anymore as I'm trying to be a husband and a father and, you know.
Right.
You said like you feel like you're emotionally present with your kids. I mean, I have 4 kids and I feel like I am with them, you know, most of the time, and it's easier. There's a way in which I don't feel as vulnerable to them, I think, as I do to other people. Where I'm just willing to be more present. It's easier. Now there are other times when I have 5 things that I'm thinking about because that's how we are wired, and my kids will be like standing right in front of me going, Dad, 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 and I hardly even notice it because I'm like just thinking about so many things, and I'm more present to the reality in my head than I am to the kid right in front of me.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah, which has happened.
And it's not a reflection on how much children.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's not a reflection on your care. It's an expression of how our dysfunction is playing itself out and how we figure out how to cope with it.
And learning how to be more present.
Yeah.
More consistent.
That's really the invitation for a 5. We're miserly with our presence, and we have to reckon with the reality that our presence is the greatest gift we have to offer people, especially those who are closest to us, especially those who are most likely to notice our absence.
You know, Steve, I don't think we mentioned we told the story of about how your spiritual director, the nun, who's an 8, walked up to you and poked you in the chest and got right in your face.
You need to stop thinking so much.
Yeah, that's what she said to you in the moment was, you need to stop. And I think all of us 5s need to hear that. We need a little nun coming up and getting in our face and poking us right in the chest and saying, you need to stop thinking so much.
But also, one of the most important developments in my life is developing a relationship with someone who invites me into my heart space.
Yeah.
Not intentionally, but just through who that person is. This person happens to be a 2. They're very good with heart space. So me being around that person, I invite them into head space. They invite me into heart space. And if you have healthy relationships with these other types, they can be entry points into the other parts of ourselves that we have a hard time accessing on our own, right? So when I'm free to be in my heart space and like engage that part of who I am, that is a wonderful gift.
Yeah.
And I will not be able to do that if I'm not being fully present to that person.
Yeah.
So it's giving a gift of presence to other people is also a real gift to myself. It's part of self-care. To be really present to people.
Yeah.
In moderation. The right people at the right times, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, yeah. I think that also resonates because as much as I mentioned like chasing after peace and understanding and trying to engage more meditative things, it has been within the intent to increase mindfulness and presence, you know, and that because that is because that's the thing that I know that gets away from me, I guess.
Yeah,
you know,
I think each type avoids that in their own way, and we're all trying to. That's some of the Enneagram is useful for all of us is to do that. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah. Oh no. That was the completion of the thought. You know. Yeah, that's all very Very, very interesting to chew on. And again, this is why I was excited to talk to both of you at length about this, is because like I sort of I didn't know what to expect, but I was kind of expecting a surprise, and I didn't necessarily think I would resonate with the 5 as much as I do.
Yeah.
In this sort of way.
But it also helps explain why you resonate so much with the 9, because a lot of the observable energy in a 5 is so similar to 9s. We're avoiding conflict or whatever is sapping our energy, right?
Yeah.
There is a sense of low energy. There is a sense of withdrawal, right? There's a sense of being an observer on the world rather than a participant, right?
Yeah.
So of
which
course
is
you're going to resonate
huge.
with 9.
Yeah, you were already tapping in and were very aware of all the right things. You were reading the signals. It's just those signals can point to a few different destinations.
Yeah. And I think that distinction between avoiding drama and avoiding conflict, I think that was one of the things that was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
This is making sense in that regard.
And this is why I continue to stress Enneagram as oral tradition, because it is oral tradition.
Yeah.
It works a certain way. And so books can be very useful. They're one of the best substitutes for direct conversation. But say, for instance, online typology sorters, the little quizzes we can take, maybe sometimes they can reveal things that can be helpful. By and large, they're not so helpful precisely because they can't sort out these distinctions, right? For one, they're based on your own self-awareness, and the assumption of the Enneagram is that you're likely not that self-aware, right? Yeah. And then to continue on to the level of sorting out how the same behaviors can have very different sources, right? Or let's say you resonate with 5 energy and 8 energy and 7 energy, and you're like, well, which one of these is it? And it turns out that there's a reason why, because actually you're one of those and you access the others at certain times.
Yeah.
Or a pattern that shows up sometimes with people who are particularly not self-aware is that they'll take the test and they'll get the results on either side of the one that they probably are, because you can resonate with their wings better than their own energy because they're that out of touch with the dynamic that's happening.
Because whatever you are, part of the game is it tries to hide itself from you.
It only works as long as you don't recognize it for what it is.
Yeah.
So it has to stay undercover.
Yeah. There's stuff that we keep in our shadow. We are kind of intentionally unaware of it.
So anyway, that's why I stress the value of actual conversation.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And so
this was really, really valuable.
Yeah, if I can plug our podcast again, that's why part of the approach that we take is we're trying to find people like you who are at different parts in their journey. Like some people who haven't even been typed, and we type them on the episode. Other people maybe working with it for a year or two, and so they know a little bit, but we can kind of help encourage them on where they might go next with it. I'd like to get some people who know more than us and are able to teach us a few things and maybe tell us where to go next,
And to pull the rug out from under our podcast.
Yeah. This is what I've seen with the Enneagram podcasts that I've listened to already, is you're dealing with people who've been doing it for 30 years already and they know all their stuff. I want to engage people from a lot of different places and do learn from them, but also just see where they're at in their journey and listen to their story. And I think it's super useful for people to hear right now where you're at, Blake, and to hear us go through this and the way we talk about it. And hear it spoken. I think that if all you know about the Enneagram is what you've read on Twitter, you're probably not in a great place. You need more than that.
That's fair. And that's the thing.
Twitter is bad, but you need more.
Right. Yeah, and that's the thing about those sort of like you get these little touches here and there,
Yeah.
and you know that it's referring to something really deep that's happening elsewhere.
Yeah.
But those conversations, because they're referential, because they're referring to someone else's deep experience or personal research or whatever it might be, it's hard to access that, which is why this has been so fruitful. And I'm very thankful that you guys took the time out of your evening to walk me through this, because this was extremely helpful.
Good. I'm glad.
I'm glad. It'll be interesting to see, as you sit with this and continue to discern and explore it on your own, it'll be interesting to see after a while where you're at with it. And maybe you'll have new insights. Maybe you'll realize that we're barking up the wrong tree. Or maybe you realize that this is good and we can take a step deeper and see what happens.
Sure.
It'll be interesting to hear your feedback.
Yeah. So I've got some homework to think about things a bit more, and then we'll loop back around here in the near future and revisit that. Now, has your podcast launched, or do you have a launch window?
We
at this point?
that we will launch by the time you air this. We'll see how it goes, but that's the plan.
Awesome. And where can people find you online?
Well, they can find me at SethHarshman.com, and I'm actually just starting to try and do Enneagram things full time. So seminars, workshops, and individual coachings.
Awesome.
I'm working towards getting my license in as a life coach, and it'll be a lot of like Enneagram-based coaching. And so they'll be able to find that stuff at SethHarshman.com. I'm on Twitter at Seth Harshman. And then the podcast is the E9 Podcast, and there's a account for that as well, at E9 Podcast.
At
awesome.
E9 Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That's the numeral 9.
Yeah.
Numeral 9 podcast.
E9. Yes.
Yeah. As a handy shorthand for Enneagram, E9.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great. Steve, do you have any place people can find you online?
Yeah. You can find my odd and hopefully insightful Twitter feed at skeptical_monk, because Skeptical Mystic was taken and I had to figure out what to do. At skeptical_monk. And then I've got this funny YouTube channel where I'm trying to upload things that are thought-provoking and challenging and maybe hopefully encouraging, which again is Skeptical Mystic. If you're searching that on YouTube, I'm pretty small, so you might want to throw quotation marks around it when you search for it. But I'll.
Yep, and Steve also had a series with me talking about mysticism and the Christian tradition specifically, and that's in this feed as well. So
awesome.
Yes. Well, again, thank you, Seth and Steve, for taking your evening and setting it aside to go through this, because it was very helpful for me, and I am very happy to be able to sort of present this to people within the feed, and then loop back with you soon to
We're excited
It's our privilege. It's our privilege.
Thank you for the opportunity. It means a lot to us. We appreciate it.
Of course.